My name's Clay Smith, and I'm here with Mr. Kirk Loggins today to talk about his experiences in journalism in Nashville, just kind of the history of that and kind of what he thinks about journalism now and in the future. So first, Mr. Loggins, I'd like to ask you if you could just give us a brief kind of history of your work experience in journalism.
Well, I just sort of fell into it. I mean, I was the editor of my little high school paper, and therefore I knew the people who put out the weekly paper in Dixon, and I went and asked them for a job in the summer after I got through high school, and worked there 3 summers, I guess, in college. And then I got through Vanderbilt and had no idea what I was going to do, and it happened that they had just sold that paper to a little chain out of Clarksville, and so I got out of college and I became the editor, or my title was associate editor, but the editor had moved to Florida, so of the Dixon County Herald, and I was there for 4 years, and then got a job at the Tennessean in 1972, and worked on the state desk there for 3 years, and that was what covered everything outside of Nashville in Tennessee. And then I was the Washington bureau for about a year at the Tennessean, and came back from that, and it happened that the courthouse beat opened up, and so they sent me down to do that in December of '76, and I was basically there for the whole rest of my career until 10 years ago when I took an early retirement deal.
Okay. What inspired you, thinking back to, I guess, even in your high school days, what inspired you to be a journalist or to work at a paper?
Well, I guess I was just always fascinated by the flow of things, being sort of, I mean, you're at least on the edge of the action, whatever you think it is. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to be in on that. I remember the first summer I worked at the paper in Dixon, we had a fairly big election. And that election night was just a wonderful thing, Mm-hmm. I mean, here you are in the middle of all this stuff as it's happening, and you're sort of channeling that information.
Right. When you think about your career and people that you've worked with, and maybe just other journalists, who do you think influenced you the most during your career? Or if you had to think of
the guy who hired me at the paper was named Jimmy Carnahan, and he was a big, kind of rough, old-fashioned newspaper type. He was the state editor, and probably him more than anybody else. Of course, John Siegenthaler was the editor and then the publisher, and he was a very energetic, sort of, I don't know, crusader may be too strong a word, but he made things happen. It was sort of interesting to be around him and watch him get something going.
Right. When you think about the first years that you were in the newsroom, maybe in high school, but especially in your years at the Tennessean, what were some of the most important things that you realized learning, that you needed to learn or that you did learn early on, as far as how you got your story out there and what was
Oh, well,
needed?
Of course, get it right,
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it helps if you do make a few mistakes and you learn, I can't do that again, Well, the slogan, is get it first, get it right, and get it all. An aspect of get it all was when we used to have more competition, and there's lots of competition now, but it's at a different pace,
Mm-hmm.
But in print news, it used to be there was here, the Tennessean and the Banner, and if you did get it wrong or you didn't get it all, they might fix it the next day,
Do you see that with the Banner no longer being here? Some people have said that the Tennessean kind of can publish things with less accountability. Do you think that's true, that since they don't have that back and forth anymore?
Well, yes, but it's amazing. Somebody I knew at the paper, well, she didn't really invite me over for this. A lawyer who was going to be on a little discussion panel thing invited me over to Belmont to talk to some high school kids 3 or 4 years ago. And I'm trying to explain to them the competition between the Banner and the Tennessean, and that when the Banner folded up in 1998, the people of the Tennessean thought, wow, we won. All these years, we won. And then after a couple of years, you realize, but what? you know, because it's sort of like you're on sinking sand, you know. I mean, you're the only game, the only print game, but you're so much less necessary or important than you used to be. Mm-hmm. So, right, the accountability, true, there's not another print medium to call you on it, probably, mm-hmm. but who's reading the thing is the problem, you know.
Right. Thinking back on your career, is there a particular story or moment that sticks out that you were really proud of in your work, or something that you wrote?
I don't know, really proud of. I mean, there were things that I enjoyed. Mm-hmm. I don't know any one story that. I mean, it was sort of frustrating. Well, you're not from here, so you wouldn't know the Perry March story, but mm-hmm. we had this guy who was convicted of murdering his wife, but the body was never found. And this story went on for years. For up toward 10 years before he was finally convicted. And I was around for about 5 of that. And it was frustrating in that it was never resolved during the time I was there, but it was a great story. It was just an amazingly rich story. Probably that as much as anything. Of course, we had the clans here. All this is way before you were born, but in 79 and 80, Siegenthaler decided we needed to investigate the Ku Klux Klan, which was getting sort of stirred up again in some in Tennessee. And so we spent several months on that, and that exposed me to things I wouldn't have otherwise seen. Mostly just watching, I mean, I covered a lot of murder trials, you know, and you wonder, do these people, is the prosecution right? They're usually right, but not always right. And you wonder about those, especially death penalty cases, mm-hmm. you know.
What initially drew you towards the courthouse and the trial version side of?
Well, it just sort of happened that they assigned me down there, but then I think it was a pretty good fit because some people would think it was too slow. Some people, you know, don't like to sit around and cover a trial. And I usually did. I just thought it was you might have to wait for some action, but there would be some. So, and then I sort of liked plugging into a system where you know, get to know the people and perhaps they'll come to trust you and talk to you more. So I always said, you know, a good day was like going to the movies for me, going to that courthouse.
All right. Could you maybe give us a little bit of, especially since you spent so much time in your career at the courthouse, what kind of a typical day was like, or just an example of kind of what the process for you would be, maybe researching the case beforehand, or if you just go and... Well,
back to that business about the banner, the whole rhythm was determined somewhat by when the paper came out. You know, the banner printed in the morning, right. Or I mean up in the day. So I would get there maybe at 9:30 or 10 if I didn't have some good reason to be there earlier. And the banner came out about, I don't know, 10:20, 10:30 maybe. And of course you always wonder, what do they have? What do they know that we didn't know? So it was somewhat determined by what's the banner up to. And then of course there might be a trial, there might be some specific thing going on, but let's say there's not. It was determined largely, well, what's the banner up to today? I guess then they had, and we used to have various editions then. You know, there was the banner, it would have their first edition, which went out in the country. Then they had 3. And they'd update it around 1, and then there was another one, I don't know, 2 o'clock or something, you know. Mm-hmm. So you're always wondering, you know, what's that going to mean for my day? Well, once the banner was gone, obviously. I should say, at the courthouse, when I got there was this little hallway with 3 rooms on it. The Tennessean newsroom, the Banner newsroom, and what I call the radio guys newsroom. And it was just like a little beehive going on. There were usually 2 or 3 people in ours. The Banner had 3 or maybe 4 people in theirs, and there were several radio people, a couple of them who stayed there pretty much all the time. Well, by the time I left there, 25 years later, I was it most of the time. You know, there was no more banner. I don't think any of the radio stations, certainly didn't have anybody come stay down there. They might have had a key to the room, I'm not sure. But it was pretty much, it was down from, you know, 6 or 8 people to me.
Right.
Over that time.
We've kind of already used a lot the example of the Tennessean against the banner, but I think this could be said for all media generally. But with some of the growth of more corporate media, what do you see? There's obviously kind of a lack of competition in a lot of circles. This is just a perfect example. What do you think? How do you think that harms maybe how news is reported for both the people who report it and for the public? What is, or do you see like that as harmful, or do you think that the
Well, I
competition
think
is
so.
good?
I mean, well, you know, people who were great enthusiasts for the internet were expecting, and in some ways this has happened, but that it would generate lots of new sources. New people would be able to get into the flow of things. And in some ways that's happened. But certainly in the print business, it's the exact opposite. Because, I mean, obviously if you have 6 or 8 people running around a place looking for stories, they're going to generate more stories than one person and 2 or 3. I mean, each office, like the DA's office now, for example, has their PR person who puts out releases sometimes. But, I mean, institutions only put out flattering stories about themselves. So to me, it certainly has reduced the amount of information or embarrassing information that might ever get out, you know.
Right. We'll talk a little bit more in a minute about kind of what you think about the internet and its presence. But do you see a way for that to be restored, to restore that competition? Do you think that it would just be necessary to get more people involved in the papers to report on those things, or do you see like maybe a foreseeable way to?
Well, I kind of doubt that it's going to happen. Because, I mean, everything about print journalism seems to be a declining industry, which means, I mean, unfortunately, you know, if they're almost close to losing money, they're going to cut back on expenses, and when you cut back on expenses, you probably cut back on the quality of your product, and you cut back on the quality of your product, you know, it's hard to get away with charging more for a sorrier product. So, you know, ideally that would happen, but I doubt that it's going to happen.
Right.
Now, and of course, you know, most newspapers are trying desperately to figure a way to tap into the internet market, to find a way to sell what they've got on the internet. And the Wall Street Journal apparently can do that. But that's kind of a specialized product, you know. So I don't know. I'm not very hopeful about that.
Right. Thinking back to, I know you've covered a lot of cases. Did you, can you think of some ethical dilemmas that came up with what you reported, or with what you saw, and then whether to report that or not?
Well, I guess, I don't know if you're aware of the case of the judge in Knoxville now, Judge Baumgartner, who just got, you know, in big trouble for, basically he was addicted to drugs, and he was getting some of his drugs from somebody who was on probation in his court. And that has now caused another judge to decide they have to retry these 4 horrible murder cases that he presided over. It's a disaster for the Knox County judicial system. And I never had exactly that happen, but if you have a judge, you feel like you have a judge who has some reduced capacity. I mean, I had one time who, I think he had kind of a stroke, and he didn't quit for maybe 2 years after that. So what do you do about that? You know, I mean, here's somebody you know and like, who's been doing a good job and just doesn't seem to be doing it anymore. So what measure do you use to decide, I need to write about this? So that's a problem. And then sometimes you get caught in these things where you're trying to protect a source, and it would be useful to you to use something that you know off the record and you feel like you better not. Those are problems. Yeah.
Right. And some people have talked about another thing that's harmful to the way that news is reported today, and with the internet, and also the rapid speed that people try to report the news, is that there's not, people aren't putting as much emphasis on building their sources. Can you maybe talk a little bit about the importance of sources to your reporting?
Well, to me, it was, I thought, important in that, I always told people, I don't know, a lot of the stories that I wrote came from just being at the courthouse and running into somebody, who might tell you something. Those stories, it's what I was saying about if you're getting all your information from a press release from the official PR person for whatever agency, that's not going to happen. These were things that people, they wouldn't necessarily call me up and tell me, but if they saw me, they might tell me, So, and they're probably telling you that only because they know you won't, what I would say, burn them. You won't expose them for having told you that about something that might be, unflattering to their boss or to a judge that they practice in front of or something like that. So, yeah, I thought sources were just wonderfully, I was always grateful to people who told me things. And the longer I was there, but then the flip side of that is your familiarity gets to be a problem. You're sort of obligated to maybe cut them a little slack sometimes,
Kind of a conflict of interest sort of thing. You spoke a little bit earlier about the change of how many people used to be in the courthouse always with the Banner and the Tennessean and radio, and kind of how you were, when you ended up retiring, that you were kind of the last man standing. Why do you, of course, it's we've kind of talked already about why people have been cutting back on that expense, but why do you think that you specifically were kind of the last man? Do you think that was just how it played out, or did you express to the Tennessean a dedication to want to continue to be there?
Well, I guess we hadn't quite we were sort of headed in that direction, because I know the last few years I was there, one year is part of my evaluation, and for years that's one thing I have to give Siegenthaler credit for. Gannett bought the Tennessean in 1979, and a whole lot of their bureaucratic structure didn't really kick in until Siegenthaler retired, and that was in '91. And there was a lot more paperwork, evaluations, and what I would consider crap, from then on. And the last one year, I had to sign sort of a pledge that I would cover fewer trials, which to me was nuts. Why am I there? But we had this editor who, it seemed to me, had actually hostility toward sort of the courts and the legal system, and just didn't think it was worth putting in a lot of time to, and you have to put in a lot of time to cover trials. It's dangerous to try to cover a trial if you're not actually there. So, they were headed in that direction. And then since then, it seems to me, they expect, whoever they have as their court reporter, they never give them time to really go down there and stay, Mm-hmm. So that's, to me, a problem with their current approach.
All right. We've already talked some about the internet and how that it's harmed journalism. I just wondered if you had any other explicit concerns about not just the internet, but how news is being reported, how that has been changed for the worse in the last 20 or 30 years, and if you did have any thoughts about if it had changed for the better in any ways. I'd like to know those as well, if you had Any thoughts
Well,
on
of course,
that?
in some ways, it's better that there are all these alternative sources, right? That, you know, a single newspaper is not the whole game anymore. And I don't know how much of this is worse, but the whole gotcha mentality. Yeah, I mean, these political campaigns are very bad about that. You know, somebody says something slightly stupid, and that becomes the story of the day or maybe the week. You know, and it's so petty, it's so small, and then it seems that journalism is actually less likely to try to you know, interpret and explain anything beyond simply laying it out there. You know, nobody wants to be accused of showing any bias either way. And if you try to explain anything, you'll get accused of being biased one way or the other. So the safest thing to do is just to lay it out there. But often you're not really letting people know whether it, and I would say that news people do know more about, should know more about what something means than your average citizen does, you know, and they should try to explain it to them. But I think currently there's less of that.
So there's just kind of a failure to really try to interpret what's happening.
It seems to me.
What do you think are some of the most valuable lessons that you learned during your career?
Well, I guess don't jump to conclusions. You know, would be one. I was always impressed when people would do anything contrary to type, contrary to their, you know, your expectation of them. That you need to, you know, respect people. You need to, you know, we all tend to joke about and laugh about people that are different, and you need to try to understand, you know, everybody's point of view. Because, you know, generally people have some reason for the things that they do. You need to try to understand that.
Again, thinking about your work in the courthouse and just with the legal system in general, why do you feel? Obviously, I would think that you would feel that that's important, since that's something that you were doing. Why would you think that that would be important for the public to regularly be updated on what's happening in the legal system?
Well, it's you know, we're all, you know, in this game, and what rules are going to apply? You know, what will society accept? And it does change over time. Well, you know, what society will accept is okay or not. So, and then of course you do have to watch, hoping it's going to be fair and honest, the system, you know, as it works.
All right. What did you enjoy? What was one of the aspects of working in journalism that you enjoyed the most, or can you name some things that you really enjoyed?
Well, it's watching things happen and then being able to, you know, tell other people about them. Again, this is another thing happened before you were born, but there was this major trial in Atlanta. They'd had 28, I think, young black guys got murdered, and they felt like there was a pattern. And this was in about 80, 81, and they wound up charging this one guy with all those crimes. And so the paper sent me down there to cover that trial. And I remember thinking, this is amazing. I'm getting paid for this. I mean, you know, it's just truly this show going on, you know, and I'm getting paid for this. So there were, when you had that kind of thing going on, you know, not only are you getting to watch whatever happened, but you have the responsibility and the privilege of telling people about it.
Right. And this is kind of the last question I'd like to ask you, and maybe if you could give us some things. What do you think are some of the most important concepts for an aspiring journalist or someone that's interested in journalism, things that they should keep in mind today to be successful in their pursuits?
Well, I think, question everything, question everybody, question everybody's motives. I don't think you have to, that doesn't mean you're cynical necessarily, but just you have to wonder why are people doing, and there's so much bogus rhetoric in any field that people put out, and they get to where they don't even think about what they're saying. So, of course, I don't know. Technology, I stopped at the email phase, I haven't gone beyond that, so I can't really say much about whether that's good or bad. But just, respect the people you're dealing with, because, again, they all have, reasons for the things they're doing. People are struggling to make a living, and there's a tendency among, I think, news types to sort of mock, people who are poorer than they are. So, take people seriously.
All right. Well, that's all I've got. Thank you very much for being with us here today, and we appreciate your input and your contributions to journalism.
Well, enjoyed it.
Thank you.